It's a clash of titans. Fabiano Caruana with the white pieces, taking on the one and only Magnus Carlsen in a high-stakes blitz battle. Buckle up! This is going to be electric. Fabi opens with an English, but Magnus meets it head-on, immediately developing his bishop to b4 to put pressure on white's setup. The knights dance in the center as both players fight for control. The next phase is all about sensible development. Both players bring out their minor pieces, connect their rooks, and tuck their kings away safely with castling. And now, the tension builds. White castles, black lines up a rook on the e-file, and then the pawn breaks begin. Black strikes in the center with d5, while white expands on the queen side. The conflict comes to a head as white pushes on with b5, and black counters by ramming the pawn down to d4. And here, in a complex position, white has a crucial decision to make. Resolving the central tension was the way to go. Taking the pawn on d4 first, black recaptures on d4, the knight still hops to e4, the bishop comes out to f5, and the other bishop to g5 would have kept the balance. But in the game, Caruana plays the knight to e4 immediately, and this is an inaccuracy that hands a clear advantage over to Magnus. Carlsen immediately punishes the slip. He trades knights on e4, clamps down on the queen side with c5, and begins to improve his pieces, rerouting a knight and challenging white's center with f5. And black simply recaptures the pawn on d4, solidifying his central control. A brief maneuvering phase follows. The pieces shuffle around as both sides jockey for position, preparing for the next big clash. With a solid advantage, Magnus had a chance to land a decisive blow right here. A concrete win was on the table. The killer move was queen to d7. If white pushes the pawn to c5, the queen simply snacks on the pawn at b5. The rook slides over to b1, and the queen calmly retreats to d7, leaving black a clean pawn up. But instead, Magnus plays the bishop out to e6, a slip that lets most of that hard-earned advantage evaporate. A big let-off for Caruana. White brings a rook over to the c-file, putting pressure on the queen side, and black tucks the bishop back to f7. White pushes the pawn to a4, but this is another slip. It's a mistake that allows black to seize the initiative right back, and Magnus does just that. The rook slides over to c8, and white is forced to block the position by pushing the pawn to c5. Black captures the pawn on e4, but this is a significant inaccuracy. He misses a golden opportunity to play queen to d7, which would have launched a tactical sequence to win a piece. What a find! Caruana plays, bishop takes the pawn on e4, the only move that keeps him in the game. An incredible piece of calculation to navigate the tactical minefield. Black simply recaptures, the knight taking the bishop on e4, and another fantastic move. Queen takes the knight on e4 is again the only move that holds. Caruana is finding every correct step. And here's the point. If black's queen comes to d5, white simply trades queens on d5. Black recaptures with the bishop, and the bishop snaps up the pawn on a5, winning a piece. Magnus brings his bishop to d5, challenging the white queen. But the queen retreats to e1, and this is too passive. An inaccuracy that hands the advantage right back to black, who can now ramp up the pressure. And Magnus goes for it. The e-pawn marches forward, the bishop repositions, and the queen swings over to g5, creating serious threats against the white king. White plays the bishop to d2, but this is a defensive error. The engine screamed for g3 to blunt black's kingside attack, and now Carlsen's advantage grows. Black is on the verge of victory, and there was one move here that would have sealed the deal immediately. The crushing blow was pawn to e3. White is forced to capture. Black recaptures on e3. The bishop takes back, and black's bishop simply takes the pawn on c5, and the position is completely winning. But in a shocking turn, Magnus plays queen to e5, a major mistake that throws away almost the entire advantage. Suddenly, white is back in the game. An immediate reciprocal error, white plays pawn to g3, failing to play the punishing c6 pawn push. The advantage swings decisively back to Carlsen. The bishop snaps off the pawn on c5, taking immediate advantage of white's slip. White's bishop moves to b4, creating a pin and hoping to cause trouble. Brilliant! Magnus plays bishop to a7, a stunning sacrifice, seemingly hanging his rook on c8. But it's all part of a master plan to shatter white's coordination. White has no choice but to capture. Rook takes the rook on c8. And the recapture, rook takes rook on c8, is a great move. The only way to maintain the winning advantage, keeping white's pieces completely tangled. From here, it's all about the passed e-pawn. White tries to set up a defense, but black's pieces coordinate perfectly to escort the pawn down the board. It marches to e3, and after the trade remains a monster. White's position is on the brink, and finding the right defense is critical. A tougher resistance was possible. The best try was queen to e2. Then, after bishop to d4, rook to c7, queen to e4, and bishop to c3, white could still fight. Instead, Fabi plays bishop to c7, and this is a mistake that loses on the spot. The passed pawn is now unstoppable, and here was the instant win for black, the most clinical finish. Pawn to e2 with check was crushing. After b6, queen to e3 check, king to g2, and bishop takes the pawn on b6, black is winning a pawn and the game. But amazingly, Magnus misses it. He plays queen to d4, a mistake that gives white a surprising glimmer of hope. The game is not over yet. White plays knight to e2, but this inaccuracy fails to capitalize on black's error. The winning chances are slipping away again. The queen takes the pawn on a4. It's not the most precise move. Queen to e4 was stronger, but black is still firmly in the driver's seat. White pushes the pawn to b6, desperately trying to create some counterplay on the queen side. And what a fantastic move. Bishop to b8 is the only move that secures the win, a brilliant defensive and offensive idea. The point is simple. If white's queen moves to d1, black's queen goes to a5. If the queen tries c2, the black queen returns to d2, completely dominating the board. The knight jumps to f4, a last-ditch effort to find some activity for white's pieces. Magnus plays queen to e4. It's a very strong move, but pushing the pawn to e2 was even more decisive. This is the final critical moment. White had one last chance to hold on and make black's task difficult. The best defense was queen to e2. After pawn to g5, bishop takes bishop on b8, the rook recaptures, and queen to d3 would keep the fight going. But instead, Caruana plays rook to c3, and this is the final game-losing blunder. It walks right into a brilliant finish. Astounding. Pawn to g5. A second brilliant move from Magnus. This pawn sacrifice deflects white's defenders and wins material by force. Absolutely stunning. White takes the bishop on b8, but the position is completely lost. There's nothing to be done against black's attack. Black captures the knight on f4. It's not the computer's absolute favorite, but it's more than enough to secure the win. White recaptures, pawn takes pawn on f4, and in this completely hopeless position, Caruana resigns. What a game. A wild, chaotic battle full of mistakes and brilliant flashes from both sides, but in the end, Magnus Carlsen takes the win. Caruana resigned because the position is hopeless, and here's just one of the lines he saw. The king steps aside to h7, the pawn pushes to f5, the rook takes the bishop on b8, the queen recaptures the pawn on e3, and the rook comes to g8 with a crushing check, winning overwhelming material.